Welcome to Beat Diabetes and another edition of our Books and Quotes series. And today we'll be looking at Gary Taubes and his book, Why We Get Fat. This is not exactly a new book. It's been around for quite a while, but I think it is very relevant. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, I don't care about why we get fat. I'm not fat, or maybe I am fat, but that doesn't bother me. My big issue is diabetes. But there is a relationship between why people get fat and why they get diabetes. And no, it's not quite the perfect link that you may think. You may assume, all right, you're fat, that makes you diabetic. It's not quite that simple, but we're going to look at Gary Taubes. He's an interesting guy, and his big concern is exactly what this book says, why we get fat. Apparently, he struggled with weight himself, and he's a journalist. He's not a doctor, not a nutritionist. He is a journalist. And he was concerned of what makes people gain weight. One of the fascinating facts of life is that for most people, as they grow older, they become heavier. And often it's such a gradual increase, they don't realize it. And then they look at themselves 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and they think, yeah, I picked up quite a bit of weight. And the reality is most people, as they get older, they become more likely to come down with diabetes. There are type 1 diabetics that become type 1s when they're 8, 9 years old. But for type 2s, usually it happens with age, not as much as it used to. Now there are younger and younger people becoming type 2 diabetics. But the reality is the older you get, the more likely you are to become diabetic. And obesity has something to do with it. It's interesting that if you look at some of the key players in speaking up for the low-carb, high-fat diet and the idea that we can reverse diabetes, many of them had their start with dealing with obesity as part of their practice. Sarah Hallberg was an obesity doctor before she got really into the idea of defeating diabetes through a low-carb diet. Eric Westman has been an obesity doctor. Dr. Jason Fung, well, he's a nephrologist, but his first major book was not about diabetes. It was called The Obesity Code. And what we're finding is that the same contributing factors that make a person overweight also make a person diabetic. Anyway, let's get into a couple of quotes from this book. It's a big book. This is actually a simpler version. It's kind of the dumbed down version of his prior book called Good Calories, Bad Calories. It was complex, it was large, it was rather not exactly user-friendly, let's put it that way. This one is more user-friendly and shorter, so the average layperson can get it and enjoy it more. One of the things he talks about is a man, he doesn't mention his name. He calls him a well-respected exercise physiologist who was a runner. And he just ran and ran and ran. He was a jogger, and he just put in mile after mile after mile. In fact, by the time he got into his late 60s, he had run so much, he calculated it was like he ran the distance of the entire circumference of the earth 3 times. And yet, over the years, he had gained weight. With all this running and all this jogging, running around the circumference of the earth, so to speak, 3 times over the course of his running career, he was heavier than he had ever been. He had gained 30-some pounds from the time he started running to this point. And he was discouraged. He's like, well, what do you have to do to lose weight or at least maintain weight? I'm running like crazy and I'm gaining weight. So Gary Taubes interviewed him, and he asked him, well, do you suppose that if you had run 4 times around the earth instead of 3, maybe you wouldn't have gained as much weight? Now, I don't think Taubes really believed that, but he was interested in what the man would have to say. And he said, well, I don't see how I could have run any more than I did. But maybe if I could have found time to run more, I might not have gained so much weight. But he had no real answer. And this is true whether you're dealing with obesity or diabetes. If you think that running, jogging, exercising can keep the monster away from your door, you are mistaken. runners get diabetes. Ask Dr. Tim Noakes, who was really, really into competitive running, and he got diabetes. And runners can become obese. So it just isn't true. Now, basically the theme of Gary Taubes' book, he has a lot to say about different things, but if you want to know, summing it up in one idea, he quotes a man named George Cahill, former professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, and he says this: carbohydrate is driving insulin, is driving fat. That is the theme of Taubes' book and his theory, his philosophy. When you eat carbs, there's a tremendous release of insulin in your body. Now, every nutritionist, every doctor, anybody with any sense knows that. You're going to get much more insulin release when you eat a lot of carbs than when you eat a lot of fat or a lot of protein. You just will. That's beyond controversy. That nobody can really question that. So he says carbohydrate is driving insulin, is driving fat. And he goes on to say later, we do not get fat because we overeat. We get fat because the carbohydrates in our diet make us fat. So he's saying it's not really because you're eating too much. It's because you're eating too many carbs. Well, I don't completely agree with that. Sometimes people that are in this low carb, high fat, and I'm one of them, but I don't believe this. They will tell you that calories mean nothing. And if you are overweight, like he just said, it's because you're eating too many carbs. It's not because you're eating too much. But I'll tell you the honest truth. If you ever have a meal with an extremely obese person and they eat the way they normally eat, you will find they eat a lot. I mean, they take big portions. Now, sometimes if an overweight person will sit down to eat with a normal-sized person, they'll deliberately curb their appetite so as not to humiliate themselves, and they won't take what they normally eat. But if they eat honestly, they will have enormous portions. And I can remember back in the days when I went and ate pizza occasionally. Even then, I had the thin crust pizza, but it was a buffet where you could eat as much as you want. You just keep going back and back. And I can remember seeing one particular lady that I remember just kept going back for more and more pizza, and she was big, and she ate a lot. And that's just pretty much true. So it's not so much that eating a lot has nothing to do with being overweight. That's just silly. I mean, that's pushing your theory too hard. Eating a lot does have to do with being overweight. Here's the problem. The problem is when you eat a lot of carbs, you get hungrier faster and you get more hungry than when you eat a lot of fat or a lot of protein. Fat and protein don't leave you longing for more 2 hours later, but a bunch of pizza may. So eating the carbs will cause you to eat more carbs, which will cause you to eat more carbs. So yeah, you will be eating a lot for sure. It's not that eating a lot has nothing to do with being overweight, but the reason you'll eat so much is because you're ravenously hungry. And the reason you're ravenously hungry is because you're eating carbs and they make you ravenously hungry. And one of the things we hear again and again and again to the point where it could be boring, people will tell me, and they'll leave comments, when I went to a high-fat diet or a high-protein/high-fat diet, I just wasn't hungry anymore. I just did not need to eat so much. And I found I can eat just twice a day and I'll be perfectly satisfied. Some people even say once a day does it for me because fat has a satisfying effect on the body and carbs just leave you wanting for more. Now, there is some great news for overweight people. So if you're overweight, 50 pounds, 100, 200 pounds overweight, whatever it is, if you're overweight, here's some great news for you. Let's say you're overweight and you're diabetic, which most people that are extremely overweight are diabetic, especially once you pass middle age. Here's some good news for you. You don't have to get down to your normal weight to reverse your diabetes and get those numbers low. You can still be overweight and you can get your glucose levels almost normal by stop eating so many carbs. Now, eventually, your weight will catch up with that because you won't be hungry and you won't eat so much and you will lose weight even though you're not trying, even though that's not a major goal of yours. It's not the objective. You just want to get your numbers down, and most people are. A lot of people can live with being fat. Let's just face it. A lot of people look at themselves in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm big, I'm fat, but I don't care. I can live with that. I just enjoy my food. But a lot of people, once they find out they're diabetic, they can't live with it. They know it could mean amputations. It could mean kidney failure. It could mean dialysis. It could mean blindness. It is such a monster of a disease and an affliction. They can't live with that. They could have been fat all their life and had no problem. But when they hear they're diabetic, they want to do something. So what they do is they find people like me and Dr. Jason Fung and Dr. Richard Bernstein and others that say, cut those carbohydrates. And they do it not because they want to lose weight, but because they want to beat diabetes. And lo and behold, as a side benefit, the weight starts coming down. But the good news is, not only do they lose weight, they look better, and their glucose numbers come down, but they find they just don't even miss eating so much. They used to have to go to those buffets and just take plate after plate after plate after plate. And now they don't have to. It's like they're free because there's something about carbohydrates that always leave you wanting more. So there is a definite relationship between being fat and having diabetes, but it's not a perfect relationship because you can still be overweight. You can weigh 350 pounds and get those blood sugars down. Now, again, the weight will catch up and eventually you'll start losing weight. But the main thing is if you stop eating those carbs and having those insulin surges, your glucose will come down and lo and behold, something magical will happen to you. You'll find you're just not hungry like you used to be, and the weight will shred, and the numbers will improve, and the blood pressure will improve, and the glucose will improve, and the triglycerides will go down. And you will feel so much better. And we hear testimony after testimony after testimony declaring that very thing. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.